All right. It's time for me to do my Steve Martin interpretation. We're having fun now. Hey, kids, right? Hey, I bet you're as excited as I am to be here today. You know, it seems like such a long time ago that it was April when we had our successful conference in Jefferson City. But here we are at our fall business conference. So thank you so much for coming. We're in Chesterfield, Missouri, and we are also on live stream. So everybody turn around and wave at the folks on live stream. Hey, you know, it's really important that we continue to do a hybrid conference, and whether you're joining us through live stream or you're here in person, we want you to have the best experience possible. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate that so much, and just glad to have everyone here today. Well, as the week begins, please visit the conference page in your Missouri Realtors app or your program. How many of you have downloaded the app? You need to download that. It's really cool. It's very convenient. Several times today, I was like, what room do I have to go to? And I pulled my app out and went right to it. So I'm really excited about today's program, so let's get started. I want to invite Jennifer Dick to please join me on the stage. And as soon as the color guard comes in, we're going to do something a little different. At the last Cardinal baseball game of every year, the crowd sings the National Anthem. So we're going to sing with Jennifer. She has an amazing voice, and I just asked her like 35 minutes ago if she would sing. So we're doing a sing-along, but she has a great voice. But right now, I want you to please join me in turning our attention to the South St. Louis Detachment Marine Corps League 183 color guard at the back of the Varin.
Mark time, mark. Detail, halt. Lift, hey.
Please join me in singing the National Anthem. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there.
Let's give another round of applause and a very special thank you to Jennifer. Jennifer Dick, thank you so much from the Columbia Board of Realtors and South St. Louis Detachment Marine Corps League 183. Any of our members who've served in the military or law enforcement, please stand. We'll give you a quick round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you. So next, I'd like to share with you the best leadership class ever, right? They are going to have their graduation tomorrow. They have a very cool project outside, and thank you all. You want to be here tomorrow, Wednesday, the awards program, to watch them graduate, and then I think we bring the next new class in. So congratulations, you've done a great job. So. And it's always such a pleasure for me to say thanks to all of the people who are doing stuff behind the scenes. Our staff, give it up for them. I would be like my mother when she'd forget who I was, or she'd say Bobby, Jimmy, Joey, and I couldn't remember all their names if I tried to say them one by one, but they do a great job, and they're such a great part of our team, so thank you so much. And of course, our 2022 leadership team, Andrea Sheridan, our president-elect, and great. We also have Derek Schriever, our treasurer. Bobby Howe is with us in spirit, but she's not here right now. And our immediate past president, Janet Judd. Thank you so much. And of course, our CEO, Brianna Vanstrom. So, thank you. I've gotten to know, all of the team I've gotten to know so much better. I knew them, but you just you kind of create special bonds and find out so much more about people, and I told the executive committee this morning, I said, you're in great hands. These are some just class act people that I've had a chance to serve with, so you're excited for them, and Brianna's just done an amazing job, so thanks everyone for that. Now, I know that we've got a couple of things I want to mention here, how thankful we are to continue to have you as support leaders. Now, I heard that I'm listening to this really cool book, and it's on leadership. David Stewart wrote it. David's from here in St. Louis, a very wealthy gentleman and a great guy. If you've ever met David, he has Worldwide Technologies, a big building that's out off of 270. So David told the joke, okay? And I thought it was really cool. But in his book, he said, there's this story about a chicken and a pig that are going to go into business together and start a restaurant. And they're trying to figure out, what do we call the restaurant? And the chicken says, how about ham and eggs? And the pig says, I don't know if I like that or not, because I'm in 100% and you're only in 50%. And I thought about that, and I thought today, all of you are in 100%. And I appreciate that. We have such great volunteers and great leaders. So thank you. Give yourself a round of applause. Because you really are. I told the first-time attendees this morning, I told them that same corny joke, but I told those first-time attendees, reach out to these people here because they're all into this, and they will help you, and you'll grow your career. So thank you to all of you. I want to point out a couple of things, and we want to get into the program very quickly. First of all, Erin Hervey and her team, our lobbyist, Sam Licklider, Jason Zamkus, and our entire advocacy committee and output groups have done really some great work this year. We've had some great legislative wins. We have the low-income housing tax credit that we were able to keep that in place. We also continue to work with our legislators on the impact of moratoriums and the importance of the Missouri Non-Discrimination Act, MONA. I'm really hoping we could have gotten MONA passed this year. But we've made a lot of progress, and we don't need to give up on that. So we've also had tremendous legislative victory with the passage of House Bill 1662. And that bill, Sherry Asher, I know is probably somewhere in the audience, Sherry brought that to our attention and said, you know, here's a deed and it has some discriminatory language in it. And Sherry's input filtered all the way up through advocacy, all the way to Jefferson City, and the governor signed that bill on June 30th, and we were honored to be there in that presence. So that bill prohibits the recording or deeds that have covenants and restrictions that have racial language in them. And if you spot a deed that has that, we have information here at the conference, and it's also on our website, about how you can go about to help us remove that unenforceable existence of that language that's there. I mean, we all know discrimination's been around for a long time, but unfortunately, information like that is still on some of our deeds. So thank you, Sherry, and thanks to all of the advocacy people who worked on that. And I think that's a great win. That law went into effect August 28th, and again, you can find out more information on our website. And Sam actually wrote a really cool blog, so check out Sam's blog post. He does a good job on those, and would love for you to take read that. Now, beyond our legislative successes, we really want to continue to educate all of us as members. And, you know, it's important that we uphold professional standards and all of those items that encompass you and I as realtors. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about that we're going to unveil, and it actually goes along with our 2023 to 2025 strategic planning initiatives that we met earlier in the summer, is how can we as an association elevate the focus we place on professionalism and inclusion? And you know, there's so much when we start, Brianna and the leadership team, we started talking about this is, where do we start on this? And the exciting thing about what we're going to be sharing with you in the coming days is that we have money in our strategic reserves where we can get an outside organization who can help us in really looking at Missouri realtors, an all-encompassing view of Missouri realtors and how we can really take our organization to the next level in all facets of our organization. And so connecting with experts who have helped other associations in a variety of industries will give us insights and really the best practices to refine our shared values and how we can institute policy change. The proposal we're working on is an opportunity to reset after more than 2 years of significant change and ongoing uncertainty and really take Missouri realtors to a new level of success. Because after all, that's who we are, right? And you know, we want to do better, and we want to always be trying to improve and practice our games. I told the quirky story about Larry Bird, and I told him I wouldn't tell that story, but you know, Larry Bird always was practicing and looking at the floor. You know, you watch football games. I love to watch football. If you ever watch Peyton Manning on the side of the bench, he had the iPad there going over the plays. Like, what can we do differently? I mean, he was always studying, and that's who we are, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm excited about how this is going to shape and really take us to a whole different level. So you'll be getting more information about this in the next few days, and we'll be bringing that to you. So, you know, we want to ensure we have a strong foundation for Missouri realtors and that we just put us in the right direction. So I'm excited about it. Our leadership team's excited. Daryl and Michelle, who are strategic planning leadership's excited. And so we'll be bringing more information to you. Now, brings me to another point I want to bring up, and I mentioned this at my inauguration. I mentioned it in April. My theme is It's Your Story. Steve Graham and the attorneys, Robert Campbell, they've overseen comprehensive revisions to our bylaws, policies, and forms this year in collaboration with our incredibly talented risk management committees and output groups. They have fielded over, listen to this, 4,500 calls to the legal line so far this year. And we expect that number is going to increase because we have Stitzer-Burnett versus NAR lawsuit, and they now have this authorization to move forward, and you're going to see some probably not so nice things in the media about our industry. And so we need to be able to tell our story. We need to be able to be prepared for that. I know the St. Louis, Springfield, Columbia, Brian, you've done just, I know Brian and Dan and Kip and Jeff down in Springfield. If you have questions or need, seek those folks out because those are the communities that are impacted by that as well. But you've heard me repeatedly say we need to tell our story, and I want you to share your service and your story with customers and clients. So, our communications team, led by Kara Harmon, with support from the Member Engagement Committee and output groups, also need to be recognized as they've helped me share that message throughout the year and found the perfect person to kick off our conference. Now, I never want to oversell anybody, but I'm telling you what, I've heard just really cool things about this lady who's going to speak. And so for 20 years, Lori Robertson has worked in the world of speakers and events, serving both on stage and behind the scenes. For 10 years, she produced the Women of Faith tours, hiring and coaching speakers, serving as the event MC and working alongside some of the most masterful communicators of our time. Today, Lori is a speaker and a speaker coach. She regularly speaks and teaches about the power of public speaking and the influence that storytelling has to lead and help us. She's coaching high-performing professional women, and I want you to know I've met her. She produces digital events. She is one of the sweetest people I've met in just such a short amount of time, but I want you to know she has a real heart to bring a story and share a message with us today about storytelling. So, Lori, come on up, and let's give her a round of applause. Thank you.
15 years ago, I was legally blind. At least that's what my eye doctor told me, and I don't think they're encouraged to joke about that kind of thing. But what I know for sure is that I got my first pair of glasses in the 3rd grade, and I was excited to wear contacts starting in the 5th grade. And every single year when my parents would take me to get my eyes checked before school started, I had gotten more and more nearsighted, to the point where one day I asked my eye doctor what the criteria is for legal blindness, and he said, "Oh, you are." So there you go. So you can imagine how excited I was when I was going to get to have LASIK. I had a date on the calendar with destiny, and I couldn't have been more excited. But I did have a bit of a problem, and for me, it was a pretty significant one. And that was that for 3 weeks leading up to my LASIK surgery, I couldn't wear my contacts. I had to wear glasses. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal about wearing your glasses? And if you're thinking that, I know one thing about you, and that is that you are not nearsighted like I was. Because I don't care what the posters at the eye doctor's office promise you, when you are nearsighted like that, you can't pay enough money for enough bells and whistles to get a pair of glasses that are light and thin and cute. You can pay all the money, and you take home a pair of glasses my sister lovingly referred to as birth control glasses. And they cost a fortune. So it was lucky in both directions. So I never bought new glasses because I wouldn't wear them for any reason, except if it meant I could have LASIK. So for 3 weeks leading up to the surgery, I wore those glasses and I just marked the days off one by one. And one day I was wearing those glasses when I was out running a few errands. And one of those errands took me to the library. And as I walked into the library, I saw a man standing to my left in my peripheral vision, and he was staring at me. Now, I'd been to the gym, and I got a good workout in, and I was wearing a cute little workout outfit, and I thought to myself, he is totally checking me out. And so I headed back to the shelves to pick a couple of books with a little extra pep in my step. And I picked a couple titles, and I made my way back toward the checkout counter, which also took me back toward the staring man. And he was still staring at me. And what seemed kind of flattering a couple minutes before now sort of seemed creepy. I mean, really, what kind of guy stands in the library and just stares at women? This is not the place for that. And I am not the one. And I decided I should tell him. So I make my way back toward, and I decide to veer my path a little closer to this guy so that I could get close enough to give him the, I see you, Buster, look. And I was just working myself up, and as I finally got close enough to give him the look, I got close enough to recognize him for who he was, or rather, what he was. Because the staring man was actually a cardboard cutout of Luke Skywalker with a science fiction book display. You know, perspective really does change everything. There's a Wayne Dyer quote you may have heard that says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. This room tonight is full of leaders. Every person in this room is a leader, and by definition, leaders are people of influence. And some of you have influence because of your position. You are the boss. You lead the team. Maybe your name's on the sign, or you've worked your way up the levels of the organizational chart. But some of you are leaders because of your character. You've overcome challenges and you've done great things. You consistently show up and serve, and people look to you for guidance. Everyone in this room is a leader for one or both of those reasons. And that means you are a person of influence. That means you have the opportunity to impact the lives of the people around you in positive ways. An impact that doesn't just stop with that person, but it ripples out to the people in their circle of influence. And tonight, I want to tell you with absolute certainty that your superpower for the influence and impact you are made to create is your story. I learned a lot about the power of story when I spent 10 years producing the Women of Faith tour. And Women of Faith was a 2-day women's event. We toured NBA and NHL arenas in 28 or 30 cities a year. And at our peak, our average attendance was 14,000. And every week, I sat next to that stage and I watched men and women walk onto that platform and encourage and inspire everyone in the room by sharing out of their own personal story. But it wasn't just on the stage that I saw the power of story, because I was privileged to have a front row seat to the master storyteller of all of them. And that was my boss, Mary Graham. She was the president of Women of Faith, and she was a master storyteller. Whether it was one-on-one conversation or our leadership team meetings or all employee meetings or other settings, she always had a great story to match any point that she wanted to make. And one day when I'd been at Women of Faith 5 or 6 years, Mary asked me if I would ever consider stepping from behind the stage onto the platform to MC the events, to host these weekends. And it was an enormous honor that I would even be asked. And I knew it was an absolutely fabulous next step, personally and professionally. But I was also keenly aware how little I had to bring to the table. My only public speaking experience was that awful, awkward speech class in college. Was anybody else in that class? Yeah. Well, there was nothing about that class or my experience in that class that led me to believe that I was going to be able to do this, but I sure wanted to try. And I was also aware how high the bar was, because the only person I'd ever seen host the Women of Faith events was Mary herself. And she truly was the host with the most. She was naturally warm and witty and connecting, and she made it look effortless. It truly, no matter what the situation was, it looked like Mary thought of exactly the right thing to say as she walked up the steps. But I did have a couple things going for me. One is I'm a learner by nature. Have any of you taken StrengthsFinder? You know, Gallup StrengthsFinder? Yeah. So one of my strengths is learner, which means that you like learning just for the sake of learning. And I'm convinced that if you have access to Google, you have access to other people and resources who've done what you want to do, you can learn anything. So that's the attitude I took toward this. But I also had another tool in my belt. Because I produced the Women of Faith events, I had access to the footage. So I did what made sense to me at the time. And I watched hours of Mary footage. And I made myself a little Mary script. And I went out and bought a Mary-like suit. See, you're feeling this, aren't you? And for the first weekend with 6,000 women in the room in Calgary, I walked up those steps and I got my Mary Graham on. And I'm so excited to tell you, it was not a disaster. I survived and they survived. No one said anything ugly or threw anything. It just was fine. We just did the weekend and it was fine. And I considered that a big old win. But each weekend, we asked the audience to give us their feedback on these evaluation forms. And after the event, we would send those forms off to a data entry company. They would compile all of that, and then midway through the next week, we would get that information. And I always wanted to know what those evaluations said because I worked on the program, and I booked the speakers, and I needed that feedback to make the event as good as it could be. But of course, this week, I had a personal reason. And I was so interested. And so as soon as that email came, I was just pouring through that spreadsheet. And I was just going, scrolling down. Nobody said anything. Nobody had anything to say about the MC at all until I got to a comment far down on the last page where one sweet woman said what probably others were thinking, and she said, "The Mary Graham clone creeps me out." And I thought, ain't it the truth? She's weird as heck. And I didn't mean to be weird, but it was awkward because I was trying to be someone other than myself. And that's where I learned one of the top rules of public speaking, which is, above anything else, you have to be yourself. But my favorite thing about that experience was Mary's response to me. Mary could have responded in any number of ways, or she didn't have to say anything at all. But she did what she often did, and she told me a story. See, Mary had spent 35 years working in a college ministry called Campus Crusade. And all those years before, Mary was involved in producing events on college campuses. And at Mary's very first event, they too asked for comment cards. And all those years later, Mary remembered the comment on one of those events, one of those cards from her first event, where someone said, "I loved everything but the girl in the gray dress." And Mary said, "Would you like to guess what I was wearing?" And then she said, "We've all had times where we've felt like the girl in the gray dress. But you will get the hang of this. It will get better, and I hope you'll stick with it." And she was right, and I did, and it did. But I want to draw your attention to the magic of that moment, because Mary could have skipped right to the punchline. She could have said, "Hang in there, Tiger. It'll all be fine." And that would have mattered to me. But what she did mattered so much more, so much so that I'm telling you that story years and years later. Because Mary connected with me through that story, not just on a head level, but on a heart level. She empathized with me. She encouraged me by showing me what was possible, because if the Mary I knew to be the master was once the girl in the gray dress, then there was hope for me too. And it was only through sharing that story that Mary could have impacted me on the level that she did. That is the power of story. And that's what we're talking about tonight. We are going to talk about why story is so powerful to us. We're going to talk about what makes a story powerful, and we are going to talk about the power of sharing your story. Now, we all know intuitively how powerful story is. Can you think of a time when you went and saw a movie and you were so drawn into the experience that you walked out and you weren't sure if it was supposed to be daylight or dark? You had to remind yourself what day it was, and you thought, what on earth just happened? We've all sat in a theater and jumped when Michael Myers shows up on the screen, or cried when the dogs make their way home, or held your breath as Maverick pushed that plane beyond its limits to climb out of that canyon. We know from personal experience that story is irresistible and magnetic to us. But why? Why is it? Well, it turns out it doesn't start with the story. It turns out it starts with us. If you think about our ancient ancestors gathered around a campfire at the end of a long day, what do you think they were doing? What do you imagine them doing? Telling stories. Because long before written language was invented, we needed a way to teach the important lessons of the time. Our ancestors needed a way to get people to lean in, to pay attention, and to remember what was shared. In fact, anthropologists tell us that the cultures that were most successful, the ones that survived and grew and evolved, were the cultures that were most successful at transferring knowledge from one person to another. And it wasn't just the safety, the life and death lessons that they needed to know to survive in this unknown and wild environment. Of course, the time to figure out how to deal with a saber-toothed tiger is not when you come upon one on your way home from work, right? It's by listening when someone else shares their saber-toothed tiger story. Because obviously whatever they did worked because they lived to tell the story. But it wasn't just those survival type stories, it was also the way that those cultures shared the customs and traditions. They shared what was valued and what was important and what was expected. Because those cultures and the individual members, they had to stay in the group. Safety and survival meant living and hunting and working together. And getting kicked out went only one way. And so for 40,000 years, humans, we have used story as a way to teach and connect and unite and inspire. Because our ancient ancestors learned something important, and that was that when a story is shared, you need to lean in and you need to pay attention and you need to remember what you learn, because you never knew when you would need that to survive or thrive. So for us today, surviving and thriving looks a lot different than it did for our ancestors. But that same DNA flows through you and me as it did then. And in fact, science has uncovered some really interesting ways our biology drives our response to story. In fact, Claremont Graduate University has a place called the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies, whatever the heck that means, right? But those smart kids studied what happens in our brain when we hear a story. And it turns out that 3 hormones get involved in making story irresistible to us. The first thing that happens when we hear the start of a story, we get a little shot of cortisol. And cortisol we know as a stress hormone, but it's the one that tells you to perk up and pay attention when your brain senses a risk or a threat in the environment. But just like jumping when Michael Myers shows up on the screen at the theater, we know our brains are not perfect at telling the difference between what's real and what's imagined. And so in the same way, we get that shot of cortisol when our brain encounters tension or question or curiosity or uncertainty in a story. It tells us to pay attention. Then we listen to the unfolding of the story because we want a shot of the pleasure hormone dopamine. Dopamine is what we're after when you stay up past your bedtime to read one more chapter or watch one more episode. We want to know. We have an almost insatiable need to know what happens next. But then the magic comes with oxytocin. Oxytocin is known as a pro-social hormone. And oxytocin causes us to connect with one another. Oxytocin's associated with things like trust and empathy and cooperation. And it turns out that when we engage with the emotion of a story, our oxytocin levels go up. And as our oxytocin levels go up, so does our likelihood of taking action in response to a story. So the more we feel, the more likely we are to act. But emotion is also what makes our memories sticky. If you think back to any memory you've saved in your memory banks, there's an emotion associated with it. That's why it's a lot harder to remember the numbers shared at last week's quarterly sales meeting than it is to remember how you felt in the second grade when you had to read in front of the class and that jerk with the big head made fun of you. Emotions make our memories sticky, and emotions make stories sticky. So the more we engage emotionally with the story, we aren't just more likely to act now, but we're more likely to act in the longer term. It's the emotion that drives that engagement. But story doesn't just change our brain chemistry, it also changes our brain frequency. There was a study done at Princeton where they had a woman lie in an MRI machine and tell a story. That sounds nice and awkward, doesn't it? But she told a story and they recorded it while they were able to watch her brain activity. Then they played that story for other participants in this study. And they found that the brain activity in the participants began to mirror the brain activity in the storyteller. Their brain waves actually synced into the same pattern. They called it neural coupling. And they found that the more the listener engaged and understood the story, the more clear that sync happened. So stories also connect us physically. Princeton went on to continue studying what's happening, and they found that while facts and data light up 2 areas of our brain, stories light up 8 areas of our brain, on both the logical reasoning side and on the emotional creative side. And because of this increased activity in our brains, story is 22 times more likely to be remembered than facts and data. So story changes our behavior by changing our brains. So what makes a story powerful? You've probably also walked out of a movie and someone asked you later, how was it? And you said, it was okay. I couldn't really get into it, but it was okay. Or you read an Amazon book review and one of the reviews said, I couldn't get into it. I couldn't root for that character. So we know that not all stories are powerful and irresistible. So what can we do to make a story more powerful? Well, my favorite book on storytelling, and I've read a lot of them, if you're interested in digging into storytelling, specifically strategic storytelling for business, there's a great book, and it's called Stories That Stick, and it's by a woman named Kendra Hall. And in the book, she shares a study that her company underwent where they told different versions of a story to 1,600 and some people. And what they were searching for were the elements that made a story more engaging. And they found 4 elements that changed the level of engagement in a story. And in fact, if you include even one of those elements, the story's engagement went up by over 60%. The first thing they found that makes a story more powerful is an identifiable character. Well, that makes sense, right? We're people who care about people. We need a character to anchor a story. We need someone we can identify with. We need someone we want to root for. So centering your story around an identifiable character makes it more engaging. And we're going to circle back to the power of sharing your personal story. But when we think about this criteria of an engaging and identifiable character, imagine the head start you get when you share a personal story with someone who, to some degree, already knows you and already has context for who you are and what you're about. Then the second element is an authentic emotion. We have to care to care. And we need the opportunity as listeners to engage emotionally with the character in the story, with what they're feeling. And it doesn't have to be an over-the-top dramatic emotion either, but it needs to be an emotion that we can engage with. Because without emotion, a story is just a series of facts that nobody cares about. And so the third piece then is to anchor your story in a specific moment. Every story becomes a story because of a moment. Life, what you knew, what you thought was one way, and then something happened, and then it changed. And it's that something happened moment that makes a story a story. And your listener can engage so much more fully when you take them into that moment. In fact, if a story is not as powerful as you know it could be, it's often because you're being too general, too broad, too vague. If you dial into that moment of change, all of a sudden, engagement goes up. And then the final piece in those 4 elements is to include other familiar details. We know that sometimes it's the details that make a story delightful, but it's also the details that give your listener the opportunity to engage with what is familiar to them. We have to be able to see ourselves in the story to engage in the way that we could. So what do all of those 4 elements have in common? They have in common relatability. We have to be able to relate to what you're sharing in your story, to really enter into it with you. And the reason for that is that story also is the only communication vehicle that's a co-creative process. And what that means is, as I'm telling a story, you're recreating it in your own mind, just like imagining walking into the library and seeing a strange man off to the side. You can imagine what that would be like, and that is that engagement. That is that neural coupling. Along the way, I have found a few other power principles for story, and one of those is intention. You know, we've all heard start with the end in mind. And in this case, I'm not talking about the end of the story like the line, and that's why we can't rent cars in the state of Texas anymore. I'm talking about the goal. There are times that we share a story because it is just a good story and you have got to hear that. But this, we are talking about strategic storytelling. We are talking about storytelling with the intention of connecting and engaging with someone and creating action. That as a result, they will think, know, believe, or do something different. And so any story will be more powerful when you think, what is it I want them to do through this connection? And who are they? Who's your audience, and what will they relate to? What will they find relatable? The second power principle is to be willing to be vulnerable. I told you about the Mary Graham Clones appearance at my first MC weekend. My second MC weekend happened to be right here in St. Louis. We were at what was at the time the Savvis Center. I think it's the Enterprise Center now. And we had 16,000 women in the room. And I'd survived the first weekend. I learned a big lesson about being myself. And I was determined, this is going to be fun. I am going to have a blast, because the more fun I have, the more fun they'll have. I am just going to be me and let God sort it out. And so with that spirit, as the last worship song finished on Friday night and it was my turn as the MC, I trotted right up those steps and I tripped on the top one. And I fell on the stage. And don't misunderstand me. I didn't stumble. I fell. I fell all the way down to my hands and knees, and I banged the microphone on the stage. So if anybody had missed the acrobatics, they didn't miss the bang, I can tell you that. And I popped right back up, and I said something like, nothing like starting the weekend with a bang, and I went on with it. And I share that story when I'm coaching on speaking as an illustration that I'm living proof that those things we think of as worst case scenario for speakers, you'll forget what you were going to say, you'll fall. It's survivable. Trust me, it's the worst is never the worst. But telling that story and showing that I truly know what it's like to fall and survive it when you're speaking, that is much more relatable and engaging, and it sticks like the girl in the gray dress stuck with me. And then the last power principle about story is to always encourage. We've heard the Maya Angelou quote that tells us that they'll forget what we said and they'll forget what we did, but they'll never forget how we made them feel. And when you're sharing a story, you are sharing it to create a connection through which you can make a positive impact. You have something to teach or something to encourage, to inspire, to challenge, but your intention is always to help and serve because you care about the person that you're working to connect with. So make sure your story reflects that you are there to encourage them, that you want to encourage them through the story that you're sharing. So when you know why story is so powerful and what makes a story powerful, you have the opportunity to lean in and share your personal story to connect with the people you want to connect with. Whether it is a current client or a new client, a future client that you want to connect to establish trust, and so they will want to work with you. Or maybe you are connecting with friends and family in the community to help them understand your industry and the why behind how you do what you do. Your most powerful opportunity to connect with them, to engage with them, and to lean into an impact that they will remember is through a story, through your personal story. So now, about this time, some of you are digging this, and some of you are thinking, I love this, and I can't wait to start telling my story more. Some of you already tell your story and are experienced storytellers, and maybe you're thinking you will double down on telling stories, and I couldn't love that more. But some of you, I'm guessing, have doubts. And if you do, I bet it's one of three things. You doubt you have a story. You don't think anyone cares about your story. Or you think everyone's already heard all your best stories. And I'm here to tell you none of those things, none of those are true. Unless you sprung up under a tree overnight like a mushroom, you have a story. You have been places, you have learned things, you've had experiences that you can do to connect with other people. There's an Oprah quote that says, everyone has a story, and there's something to be learned from every experience. I absolutely believe that is true. Do you believe that's true? Good. I hope you do. Because we want to leave this place with you encouraged, equipped, and excited to tell your story. So when you're at one of those networking functions and someone walks up to you and says, tell me about you, or says, what do you do? We all kind of cringe at that moment, right? We never know quite what to say. But when you understand what's happening there and when you see that moment as the opportunity it is and can prepare accordingly, then all of a sudden it changes everything about that moment. See, when I walk up to you at a networking event and I say, tell me about you, what you need to know in that moment is I'm not really thinking about you. I'm thinking about my favorite subject. I'm thinking about my default subject. I'm thinking about our go-to number one thing we think about more than anything else. What am I thinking about? Ourselves. We think about ourselves. So in that moment, what is happening is I'm asking screening questions. And here's why. We go right back up between our ears. So our brain has two jobs: to keep us alive and to conserve energy. You may be interested to know that while our brain is 2% of the mass of our body, our brain uses more than 20% of our energy consumption. So our brains are constantly scanning the environment looking for context, looking to see if everything we encounter, all the 2 billion bits of information we are bombarded with on a daily basis, looking to see what needs our attention, what is worth the energy expenditure. Because if it's not, then we downshift into that subconscious gear. That's why you can drive your car and have a conversation or listen to a podcast, do your makeup, whatever, because driving your car does not require your attention. Well, yeah, you know what I mean. It doesn't require your full attention until the person in front of you slams on the brakes. And then we're right back in it. But what happens is, as callous as it sounds, we look at other humans the same way too. And when we say, tell me about you, or what do you do, we're really asking, do I need to know you? Do you matter to me? Can you help me? And so when we respond to tell me what you do with kind of a verbal resume, we really give the other person's brain permission to just downshift. That's the missed opportunity version of that scenario. But the go get 'em tiger version of that scenario is you tell a story. You tell your story. You tell the part of your story that's relatable and relevant to the person you're talking to and that leads them toward your goal for connecting with them. Whether it's someone that you hope to be a client or an employee or a colleague, whomever. You lean in and share something with them that they will relate to. And then suddenly, you've made a real connection with them. When you share the part of your story that's relevant and relatable in that moment, you check that box for context. You tell their brain to stay engaged. And you set the stage for connection. There's a book called Influence by a man named Robert Cialdini. And in it, he shares 6 levers for persuasion. And one of the levers he shares is likability. We tend to like people we decide are like us. And when we like someone and think they're like us, we are much more likely to say yes to them. We're open to being influenced by them. And so, context leads to connection and likability, which leads to the opportunity to influence. We are built for connection, and we want to know you. And so when we say, I want to get to know you better, what we mean is we want to know your story. We connect with each other through telling those parts of our story. Where did you come from? How did you get here? What experiences have you had along the way? Why do you do what you do? Where are you going from here? Those are the kinds of things we want to know when we want to know your story, because we want the opportunity to connect with you. You've seen the show Shark Tank, right? So in Shark Tank, an inventor or an inventor pair walk out, they tell the name of their product and the deal they're looking for, and then they tell the details about the product. What is it? What does it do? And then they'll get into some conversation about the numbers of their business. But eventually, one of the sharks will tee up a question that says, tell us your story. And up until that point, many times, they're skimming the trees. You can tell this is not going well for them. But then they get the opportunity to tell their personal story. They tell why they came up with this idea. They tell what they've worked and sacrificed to get to that point in that room with those sharks. They tell what it means to them, what they care about, and how they created this product out of their care and what they want to provide to other people. And all of a sudden, the whole room changes. And all of a sudden, there's connection. You know how the Grinch's heart grew 3 sizes that day he spent in Whoville? When we find common ground and similarity with another person, that's exactly what happens to our connection with them. It just grows exponentially in that moment. Our stories define us. My son is a sophomore in college, and this semester he has a public speaking class. So you can imagine I'm kind of into that. And their first assignment was to bring an object or a picture of an object from their lives and use that object to tell the rest of the class 3 things about themselves. I thought it was a fabulous assignment because it's something they know, something they're excited about, and a way to connect personally with other people in the class. And my son brought a picture of his Jeep. It's an old Cherokee, an XJ, that he put a bright blue wrap on and Baja fenders, and it's his favorite thing in the world. And Garrett is part of a Jeep family. We have Jeeps. We have 5 Jeeps. We have 2 Wranglers, 2 XJs, and a Gladiator. And if you know what those words mean, then you get me, right? There you are, common ground. Another thing that's interesting that you might be interested to know is that my husband is paraplegic. And he used to race motorcycles, and he has been in a wheelchair since then, or as he says, my legs don't work. And he does all the work on those Jeeps. And I just shared 2 personal things about me and who I am. And there are people all in this room whose little spidey senses are pinging because you found something relatable in those stories. And that is the power of sharing your story. I know that in this room tonight, there are incredible stories. There are stories of challenge and achievement, stories of service and generosity. And the reason I know that is because I've had the chance over the last week or so to talk to a few of you. And a few of you told me your story and gave me permission to share a bit of your story with everyone here, because I want you to see something important. And that is that there is something remarkable in everyone's story. But you don't have to have experienced something that gets you on the evening news to have a story to tell. Because the point is to be relatable. Because when you are relatable, you can establish that connection. One of the people I know best in this room and have known longest is my friend Angie Mulling from Springfield. Angie is often the person with the fanciest shoes in the room. But you may be interested to know that Angie got her first pair of fancy shoes for her 3rd birthday when she got her own cowgirl boots. See, Angie grew up on a farm, and on that farm, she learned the value of hard work and of family and of community. And when she was 16 years old, she drove the tractor on that farm. She sang at the top of her lungs, and she dreamed about the incredible life she would create and the difference she would make for other people. And now Angie stays as busy as anyone I've ever known, and she is always working for her clients, for her team. She works for your industry, and she works in our community in Springfield. Then I had a chance to talk to Mike Ruzicka. And Mike, did you know that Mike spent time in the Navy? Thank you for your service, Mike, and the others of you who stood. And after Mike left the Navy, he got a job in IT networking. And he was working there when, on one spring, sunny Friday, payday Friday, and everyone was excited. And some of his coworkers got called up to the conference room, and not much later, were leaving the building with their things in boxes and tears on their faces. And that day, Mike vowed that he was going to find a way to not trust his livelihood and the livelihood of his family to, as he said, some bozo in a corner office. And in January 2007, Mike got his realtor's license because he's his mother's son. He's the youngest of 9, and his mom, who we can imagine was a busy woman, she was always helping. She helped friends, neighbors, helped the community, and Mike has that same heart. And so going into real estate and helping people get into their first home and get into the home they need and they want is a perfect fit for him. So he got his realtor's license in January of 2007, and in June of 2007, he walked out for the last day of working a job, working for someone else. And it turns out that that office building is a block from here. So 15 years later, Mike is in this room with us tonight, 1 block away from where he vowed to make a way for himself, where he didn't have to work for anyone else. Then I had the opportunity to talk to Cricket Anderson. Cricket's from the West Plains area, and she was born a robust 12-pounder. She was making little chirping sounds and has been Cricket ever since. But Cricket, in her young life, experienced more hurt and more hard than a lot of us have ever experienced. So much so that when she was 16 years old, she left the family home and inadvertently left one bad situation for another and found herself at 17 a single mother. And she left that bad situation determined to make a way for herself and her baby. And on her own, she finished high school, she went to college, she worked as a paralegal, and then she got a job as a secretary in a real estate office where she worked her way all the way up through till she got her broker's license. She bought the company. She has 5 agents working under her, and she donates her time to kids and young people who are working to overcome circumstances and find success when they have everything stacked against them. How about that for a story? I also talked to Andrea Sheridan. Did you know that Andrea is a musician? You did. So Andrea is a musician, and when it was time to go to college, she thought musicians might not necessarily have a stable income, so she decided to be an elementary music teacher, because we know they make money. And Andrea's mom, who was in real estate, had had breast cancer at 27. And the treatment that helped the breast cancer harmed her heart. And so the year after Andrea graduated from college, her mom had heart surgery. And so Andrea stepped in to help her at the real estate office and found that she had a knack for that. And she continued to do real estate work and helped other teachers buy homes. And this will shock your pants off, but she realized that she could make more as a realtor in the summer than teaching throughout the year. And so she stepped into real estate full time. And she now has the opportunity to help other people with their most significant financial purchase and enjoys doing that. And then there's Janet Judd. Janet grew up as an Air Force brat. And she moved and went to 13 different schools growing up, including 3 high schools. So Janet knows what it's like to be the new girl. But she also, when she was growing up, she saw the people in blue as the heroes, the ones who showed up and helped when someone needed it most. And she knew she wanted to be one of those heroes. And so as soon as she could, she went to the police academy, where she was the first female class president elected by her peers. Then she went on to be the first female officer hired in the Clayton Police Department, joining 55 men, and she was the first female officer there. Then, as lots of police officers, she came into real estate helping her husband and had a second job like lots of police officers do, and found that she really enjoyed helping. And when her family encouraged her to step away from the force for understandable worries about her safety, she stepped over into real estate full time. And now, the former Air Force brat that moved all around loves helping families get settled into a home where they can put down roots and grow their families. And then I also talked to Antonio Serrano, and Antonio's from Springfield as well. Did you know that Antonio was born in the Canary Islands? Please raise your hand if you could point to the Canary Islands on a map. A few of you could. But Antonio, when he was 16 years old, went on his own to Ireland to go to school. He traded in his flip-flops and his swim trunks for a suit and tie. And then when he was 17, again, on his own, he moved to the U.S. in hopes that he would get a golf scholarship to college. And through the help of a host family in Illinois, he connected with Missouri State, where he did, in fact, get a golf scholarship, a full ride that allowed him to go to school. And right before he graduated, he was offered a pro sponsorship, and he went on and was part of the PGA Tour, playing alongside legends like Payne Stewart and others. And after he transitioned out of golf, he knew he wanted to do something where he could help people, where he wasn't tied to a desk. And so he went into real estate. And he is where he is today because people invested in him and believed in him and gave him a lifeline. And so one of the things he loves most now and is most proud of is his work with the Leadership Academy and helping different voices and perspectives have a seat at the table, empowering people to use their gifts to help and serve just the same way that other people empowered them. We have remarkable people in this room, and those are just a few of them. Would you give a hand to the sweet people who let me tell their story? Your story really is the conduit for the influence and the impact that you want to have. And sharing your story and connecting on a heart level really is the way to engage and inspire the people that you want to work with, the people you want to serve as customers, the people you want to serve alongside, and the people in the community who need to understand who you are and what you do and how you help and why it matters. The rest of this week, as you are spending time together, I hope that you will test the validity of what I've shared. I hope you will test your story. Take your story for a test drive and ask other people to hear their stories and see if your connection doesn't grow just like the Grinch's heart. And in fact, if you don't find real connection in sharing your story and hearing stories of others, I will absolutely refund you your ticket price for this session. Less shipping and handling. When my son Garrett was 3 or 4 years old, we took a solo road trip, he and I, from where we lived in Dallas to go visit my parents in Oklahoma. And on the way, we stopped at a little convenience store. And as we were going in, we held the door for a woman with a 3-baby stroller. It was shaped like a train. And as she went by, I looked down, and Garrett's eyes were enormous. And I leaned down to him, and I said, "Did you see all those babies?" And he said, with the most wonder in his voice, "There were hundreds of them." And isn't that how we feel when we see something in the distance that is uncertain or unclear? Our brains, in an effort to keep us safe and avoid risk, we see what we're not sure about as something to be feared. But it's when someone like you comes along and helps us see possibilities and opportunities that we can find a different way of looking at things. We need leaders like you to show us what's possible, to believe for us before we can believe for ourselves, what's possible for us and within us. There's a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that says, "Our chief want is someone who will inspire us to be what we know we could be." That's what you can do as a leader. That's what you need to do as a leader. I had a chemistry professor who would say, "Easy is what you know." And it's what we don't know and what we can't see that we fear. But you can come along and speak into us, and you can help us see what we can't. You can inspire us to reach for what we think might be impossible. You can assure us that the thing that we fear is not scary at all. Heck, it could just be a cardboard cutout of Luke Skywalker. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change someone else's perspective, you can change the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you. Okay, Lori, thank you so much. What a perfect way to set the tone of the week. And I know we have exhibitors waiting for us out there, and I know some of you are ready to get out there. So following in this session, we're going to go outside. Please be sure and welcome all of our, this is the biggest attendance we've had for exhibitors, so let them know we're welcome. And then don't forget, there's a couple of things going on here. Doors open at 8 o'clock for Women's Council, hosting Dodge, Duck, Dip, Dive, and Drink. Start stretching now. And before we conclude our program, I'd like to recognize all of our sponsors. Home Warranty Inc., USA Mortgage, Continental Title, Form Simplicity, Supra, Old Republic Title, Tech Helpline, those of you from our sponsor companies, and all of our wonderful exhibitors who are here with us today. Please stand to be recognized. Thank you for being with us. As you exit out, you'll get a reception ticket. We've got a great week planned. Enjoy the week. We'll see you back here tomorrow for meetings, and then don't forget the awards banquet tomorrow. Thank you.